Ready? Good morning, friends. This wonderful sunny morning, we will be listening to Richard Drake, whose title is Promoting Social Justice. So, Richard, are you ready?
Good morning, friends. Yes, I'm going to do this with a slideshow. And along the way, I'll explain the choice of title and what I hope to do. It's probably not as straightforward a talk as people might be expecting because it's me. So I hope that it's going to lead to discussion rather than everyone thinking, oh, what wise things he said. I totally agree with it. So expect possibly a bit of provocation. This time last year, I spoke to one of these meetings under the heading Working for Change and tried to address what the phrase working for change means to me. And I illustrated with some of the issues that I felt we were facing, which included homeless charities, but not only homeless charities. However, the conversation turned to homelessness. I'm not going to try and divert the natural flow of conversation this time. This year, Patsy asked me if I could talk about Bristol's homeless and what has changed in the light of the COVID impact. And I said, I can't really do that because I'm now much less involved in the frontline work with homeless people in Bristol than I was last year. And although I'm still keeping the Bristol Homeless Forum ticking over, I'm still in touch with it. It's not exactly alive and kicking. And I've retired as a volunteer and trustee with the Julian Trust. But in addition to my continuing role as a trustee with Housing Justice, which I had last year, I've taken, and that remains very much concerned with homelessness and housing. I've also become, towards the back end of last year, a trustee with Quaker Social Action. And that's an organisation whose charitable object includes to promote social justice and the personal development and physical and spiritual welfare of individuals and groups. So the title has come directly from that charitable object. And I've tried to use that to frame this talk. But I have to say the title came first and the talk came afterwards. So any confusion I cause is a direct result of that. Anyway, so it seemed reasonable to talk about what promoting social justice means to me. And just as with my last talk, I'm quite sure that others are going to have their own leaning on that. And I'm not trying to suggest mine is the correct or only one. But in many ways, I think as I've put this together, this talk is a kind of personal story of my change over the last 2 years or so, my attitudes towards organizations I work with, and really an explanation of why I've stopped serving a worthy cause like the Julian Trust after 16 or more years of volunteering there. And I have completely left it behind. I want to start by looking at the stated purposes of 3 charities I've been and I am heavily involved with, and their approach to promoting social change. And I want to sort of look at those charities in the context of this model spectrum of faith-based activity. This chart was used very heavily over the last 2 or 3 years by someone called John Curt, who is the faith and community lead in what was called the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. It's now the Department for Levelling Up, but it's in terms of homelessness and housing, it still has the same purpose and people there. And John is pretty much a national expert in what local faith and faith-based charities are doing with homelessness. And he could see that the stuff they were doing fell into this sort of array of work. Over on the left, you have, what happens basically, what most of the organisations helping homeless people in Bristol do, which is out on the street, giving out food, sleeping bags, soup, rucksacks, maybe putting people in touch with other services, but out there meeting people and helping them where they are. You then got building-based ones. I suppose you can now include the Feed the Homeless work from Central Meeting House in this second character building-based sort of block. Night shelters, which is where the Julian Trust was. Drop-in centres. Now this is now starting to get into the work that St Mungo's does, and Citizens Advice, CHAS, housing advice services. These tend to be the services that organisations doing the stuff on the left move into, because they realise that more support is needed. And then you get into supported housing, and this in Bristol is run by primarily run by the sort of local authority commission services like St Mungo's, Riverside, and so on. And then befriending and tenancy services that moving into prevention. So we're talking here about services to people who aren't actually homeless or on the streets, and you're trying to prevent them getting on to street homelessness by working with them and giving them the life skills they need to support a tenancy and not become homeless. Very little effort goes into that we ever see. There is some, but it starts with things like Citizens Advice, shelter to some degree, Acorn trying to prevent people being evicted. It's a very different kind of work and doesn't get the public attention that Feeding the Homeless does, because we're talking about people you can't see the predicament they're in. Whereas if someone's on the street and begging, you can see it, so everyone's attention is drawn to it. So that's a kind of array, and it doesn't look as though it's got anything much to do with promoting social justice at this stage. But my kind of theory is that the more you can work on the right-hand side, on the recovery to prevention side of this thing, the more you're going to build the experience that you need to build an evidence base for promoting social change with those that can make social change happen. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Right. So firstly, the Julian Trust, which I have personally have left behind, but it's still running. So like most of the local charities working with homeless people in Bristol, the Julian Trust places itself quite clearly at the intervention side of the spectrum. It's not trying to make change, it's trying to relieve poverty, or the symptoms of poverty. And by virtue of being a volunteer-only organisation, deliberately without a political voice, it deliberately avoids making any political statements or trying to influence. It avoids promoting social change or social justice, and is more concerned instead with being with people where they are. The ethos there is very attractive. It's working on the basis of to love a human being is to accept him as he is. If you wait until he's different, you're only loving an idea. Now, if that's not a statement of kind of unconditional love and support, I don't know what is. So it's a lovely base from which to start. And by limiting their aims and just being there for those who need them, as an organisation, it's lasted a long time. It's done pretty much the same thing, pretty much unchanged, with reasonable funding and no great crises for over 30 years. It's a model that works, but it's not a model that leads to social change. It's not a model that promotes social justice. It's a model that says social injustice will be there. I'll be there to deal with it. So secondly, housing justice. I don't know how much people know about housing justice, but I got involved with it because they put an advert in Quake for trustees, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. That seems to be where I'd like to be doing something. I knew a little bit about them, and their stated vision is that by mobilizing Christian action on homelessness and housing, that they're aiming for a society where everyone has access to a home that truly meets their needs. That means a secure and genuinely affordable home in a neighborhood where an individual can access work and services that enable them to flourish. I like that vision. I'm quite attached to it because I hadn't long been a trustee when they decided to revise the vision statement, and I put a lot of time into this. So I'm very proud of those words. They mean a lot to me, and they mean a lot to the people in the organization as well. But we're a long way from this. This is a massively far-reaching vision. But by having that there as something they're aiming for, then everything that they do and pick up as an activity has to be tested against this. Is this helping this? Is this leading towards this? And when you see what they do, you can see, well, they don't all. Their main activities, I mean, there's a few other things as well, but their main activities are supporting the national network of church winter night shelters. So the church winter night shelter in Bristol that's been run by In Hope for the last 3 years. In Hope is the new name for Crisis Centre Ministries. That has been run on the housing justice model. So have many church winter night shelters across the country. There's a quality standard for doing it, which Housing Justice maintains. So they give them the pat, says, if you want to run a church winter night shelter, here's how you do it. Now, of course, over the last couple of years, that's completely changed because the model of church winter night shelters was mostly a rotating dormitory style. We'll go to this church on Mondays and this church on Tuesdays, this church on Wednesdays, and we'll put up camp beds. And that in the pandemic has been completely blown out of the water. So the work that they do on church winter night shelters is no longer really night shelter work. It's the Bristol church winter night shelter has become basically paying for B&B accommodation over the winter months for people with no recourse to public funds, because that's something that charities can do, churches can do, that the statutory authorities can't, because these are people with no recourse to public funds. So keeping people off the streets and accommodating them is something that the church winter night shelter program has turned into. And it not only does that, it's not just how, giving people a bed for the night, it's giving them the means to move on because it gives them support in a stable accommodation, which is something that night shelters can never do. So housing justice has been part of a significant movement of realization in the world of homelessness that we never solved any problems by putting people in night shelters. We were part of living with a very unsatisfactory situation. And the more and more we put people into night shelters, the more we covered up the underlying problem. Now, it doesn't mean that night shelters aren't needed, because sadly there are always people that are going to need something like that. So, but shifting from your focus from just accommodating people on a night by night, overnight basis to giving them 24/7 accommodation and the support they need to not be in that kind of accommodation in the long term, that's moving things on. And so let's talk about some of the other things Housing Justice does. It's got a hosting project for asylum seekers. It's London based. There's people around the country doing things, and in London, Housing Justice is one of those organisations supporting asylum seekers because of its Christian faith connection. It's got contact with quite a lot of bishops. So there are quite a lot of bishops in London who accommodate asylum seekers because they can't say no to Housing Justice. The action I particularly like goes under the label Faith in Affordable Housing. And this is actively promoting the building of affordable and social housing on underutilised church property. Now, it's really taken off in Wales. Wales is quite fertile ground for this activity because of the size of Wales, because of the ability to connect with Welsh government, because of the the tradition of church in Wales, there are enormous numbers of projects in Wales where they are finding different ways, different models to fund. Hattie, could you mute, dear? So there's a lot of projects in Wales where housing justice is helping people use land better and create housing. It's harder to do in England because of the it's bigger. The government is harder to connect with, but the Archbishop of Canterbury's initiatives on homelessness and housing have given this a boost. So it's not, but by no means dead in England, and there's enormous amount of work going on in that area. Now that stuff is definitely on the right hand side of that grid I showed you, that array, working at ways to prevent homelessness, and because they're working not just with Christian faith community, but also with communities, other faith groups. Some of the church winter night shelters are actually mosques or Hindu temples. The connection between housing justice and Homeless Link, which has always been a campaigning charity, and the MHCLG, as it was called, has really helped to shape the practical government policy approaches to homelessness over the last 2 years. John Kurt I mentioned, who put that thing together, is actually seconded from the MHCLG to housing justice all the way around. He's on the housing justice payroll, and because the MHCLG doesn't employ them direct, but he's under their direction. We're paying him. They give us the money back to pay for him, to pay his wages. So that's housing justice. So let's move on to Quaker Social Action, which is a much more recent. So I'm not an expert in Quaker Social Action. I've only been a trustee since September. I've been to one board meeting, and my second one's in March. So, you know, I'm not the world expert on Quaker Social Action, but I'm finding it fascinating. So their full charitable object, if you go on the Charity Commission, it actually says, through innovative schemes designed to promote social justice and the personal development and the physical and spiritual welfare of individuals and groups, to witness Quaker testimonies to the equality of all humankind, to truth, personal integrity and peace, and to promote cooperation and harmony between all people. So if you thought that the housing justice vision statement was ambitious, this one's pretty pretty out there. But it's saying, look, what we do is a lot of things, but they are innovative schemes that we are going to design to promote social justice and bring people along with us. Their vision is of a just world where people put people first. We aim to enable people on low incomes to seek solutions to the issues affecting their lives. And to do this, we will listen to and respond to the needs of the community by running practical, sustainable and collaborative projects. We'll share our work with others when it's clear that has the potential to bring benefits. Now, a lot of the projects that Quaker Social Action has run over the years haven't been that successful, so they've stopped them. They haven't sort of moved anything on, so they've stopped them. But where they can see that there's mileage in continuing with this, it's still helping people and they're learning from it, and that learning can help others. Then they're going to use that learning to promote change, to promote the social justice that they think is required. So here are some of the projects that are currently on Quaker Social Action's list. Down to Earth is a funeral. They've all got lovely names. I don't know how they think them all up. Down to Earth is to do with funeral poverty, and I'll come back to that. It's had a significant influence on the funeral industry. Made of Money is a kind of financial help advice service. Move On Up is housing for young adult carers. So that's a different kind of homelessness, housing related issue than the one that we can clearly see with asylum seekers or people who've been rough sleeping. I mean, adult carers are young adult carers. These are people who have been caring for their families and are struggling to build their own lives independently. This Way Up, I don't know a lot about that one. That's a sort of mindfulness skills people, but it's significantly changed over the last 2 years and shifted to an online service with great success, apparently. Bags of Taste is sort of healthy, affordable cooking habits. I don't know a lot about Big Local, but this is a big pot of money that Quaker Social Action has got access to in specific areas. It kind of bids for a big local pot and then works with the community. It's sort of community development. The last two you can directly relate to my homelessness experience, if you like. They're recent, and Cook Up is a shared kitchen space for people who don't have access to one. Now that means people who've had lived experience. The people that come to this service are referred by people like St Mungo's as people that have found, they're not on the streets, but they're not necessarily in a great place of living, and they want to do a bit of catering for themselves. Thank you very much. So I've been to where this happens. It's absolutely lovely. They got their own garden. They do, got a herb garden. They grow stuff, and what they don't just come and cook meals for themselves. What they tend to do is cook to share with others, sometimes with those others in the service, but also back in the shared living communities that they've come from. So this is really a very different kind of providing food for homeless people service than dishing out food to a queue of people queuing with buckets outside Central Meeting House. It's not giving to, it's helping people do it themselves and do it with others. So it does a whole lot more than just providing food. And this is something we found during the pandemic when all the homeless feeding services in Bristol clubbed together and ran a 7-day-a-week service from Central Meeting House, is that the majority of people coming there weren't actually coming there for the food. They had other ways of getting the food. They were coming there because this is the only bit of social activity and connection with other people they had. So food services are never just food services. Turn a Corner is the new name for the mobile library. I've got a personal connection with that because that used to be called, I think, the Phoenix Project or something, which was what inspired Heather and I to set up the Park Bench Library in Bristol. We've now shut it because it was impractical once we were all in lockdown, and we were losing. It just lost its way a bit, or wasn't needed in the same way. But Turn a Corner is the revitalized mobile library for the homeless, and has come directly from the project that Quaker Housing Action used to run, and Quaker Housing Action has now been merged into Quaker Social Action. So I said I'd come back to the Fair Funerals campaign just to illustrate really that this is one of those things that really lives what QSA is trying to do. It's not just helping people deal with funeral poverty. It's capturing the information. It's working. It's had an absolutely direct influence on mandatory price transparency in the funeral industry. So funeral directors have to tell you up front what the costs are going to be, yeah, you can go find more detail on that, but there are the down-to-earth experience has fed directly into government policy, which has mandated what the standards in the funeral industry need to be. Now that's working for, to promote social justice. And although it's not a homeless project, anything to do with poverty or impoverishment of spirit, physical poverty, mental poverty, emotional poverty, those are the causes of homelessness. Homelessness is just a symptom of all those things. It doesn't just happen out of thin air. It happens because people can't afford something or can't live with the consequences of something, and they need support. It's a symptom, not an end thing. So kind of a quick run through 3 charities, but what I think I'm trying to say is that if you're working to promote social justice, you will get more useful information if you're working on the right-hand side of this array. You will do more for the individual people, but you'll also get the experience that gives you the information you need, the data grounding that you need to be able to influence policy and promote social justice. And here's my punchline. So I've found over the last couple of years that just helping people hasn't been enough for me. I needed to feel that I'm working with and supporting organizations that work with people in need to better understand issues of social justice in order that they can then advocate for change. And that quote speaks for itself, really. It's not saying you shouldn't be pulling people out of the river, because, of course you do, but you can't just do that. You've got to go and find out what's causing it, and then you will have a lesser problem in the future. And I think that, kind of to go back to Patsy's thing, what's changed in homelessness, I think that there has been a significant change in mindset amongst most, but not all, people working with and engaged with the homelessness sector. Is they are realizing that what we've done over the past 10 years is, rather than face up to the causes of homelessness as an issue, we've dealt with the consequences and hidden it away by putting more and more money into night shelters and feeding schemes without actually building up the lives of the people that are in need, in order to make them capable of living independently without that help. But there are still people that need pulling out of the river. Right, that's me. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. That was amazing. Not the sort of word I use too often, but I really believe, that is a way forward, which I heartily support. So on that case, I will ask friends questions and comments, please. Sue.
There's something about human beings that concerns me, and that's the fact that the common sense way to approach these things is to be on the right, but people seem to be happier with being on the left, and I'm quite intrigued because many decades ago, 35 years something, I went to work for the Cyrenians when they opened up their day centre. Cyrenians had actually come out from the people who set up the Cyrenians had actually been involved in the Julian Trust, and they had decided this is silly, not silly, but we need to do more than just feeding people and giving them a bed for the night. We need to help them to move on. And they started providing supported accommodation. And then they set up a day centre, and the day centre was a day centre, place where people could go to. I think Heather was involved at the end of this, go to and get a shower and get some clean clothes if they hadn't, and have a safe place, be warm, get food. But we also provided literacy. There was a library. There was all sorts of activities, and we had an advice centre. And we had a psychiatric nurse who used to come in to work with people because it was so difficult for people. I mean, I don't hold with the fact that all people who've got mental health problems who are on the street, that the reason they're on the street is because they've got mental health problems. That's true for some, but it's also true that being on the streets actually gives you mental health problems. So we worked with all the very, very practical things. And the aim was to move people on so that they weren't needing to come into the advice centre, but they were getting into safe accommodation. I left many years ago, and I don't know quite what happened to the Sarinians. I think they got ideas beyond the ability to get funding and support for, and I don't know what happened. Anyway, I think they might have got bought out by St Mungo's in the end. But it's interesting to me that I remember the council saying, who needs day centres, who needs drop-in centres, who needs something specifically for homeless people. And we've gone, and now, as you said, Richard, we're moving back to this idea of social justice, but it was so strong. And that was why I worked with the Sirens, because having been on the streets myself in my youth, I knew what it was like.
Yeah.
And I knew that you didn't just need somewhere to sleep and some food, you actually needed help in getting yourself together. So I try not to be very defeatist, and I'm wondering how this move back to social justice, which to me is absolutely essential, and I feel that in all aspects of life, how you can take that and run and it not get lost again.
Yeah, well, I don't know all the answer. I can fill in some of the gaps of what you're saying. The New Street Day Centre, I certainly was around when I started getting involved with homelessness. It's where we first, it's where we went, Heather and I, when we were investigating the Park Bench Library, and it's where we started the first service. It did, as a day centre, get taken over by St Mungo's. I don't know at what point Sirenians as an organisation was in and out, but I know St Mungo's were running it until recently. Day centres became out of fashion. They became a non-funding model. There were too many. It was felt it wasn't doing enough, and it was a place that enabled people who were determined not to come off the streets to get their showers and just go through. So it somehow stopped being purposeful, but they're still there. There's the day centre we have in Bristol is the Methodist Centre, which was always there as a very small thing in Midland Road, and is now over towards Lawrence Hill Way, and it is just as the New Street Day Centre used to be, as far as you can tell, and still doing good work. But it does tend to be dealing with the same people. You know, it doesn't seem to be moving people on so much. One or two people will pass through, but mostly they're dealing with the people that, just like in the prison system, repeat offend. They just, they get help and then they fall back again. They can't seem to make that significant change to lifestyle because there isn't the investment in working with people 24/7. There's this and I think part of the issue that I didn't speak about in this talk, but I think I touched on it in the last one. I think there's a strong argument against labeling services for homeless people or homelessness services. It tends to suggest that homelessness is in itself the problem, and it's not. Homelessness is a state of living that people have got into for a whole mix of individual reasons. And you're absolutely right. Some of the things that people present with are things that are made worse by their homelessness. You've got a very high incidence with rough sleepers of drug and alcohol dependence and mental health issues and low-level criminality. Well, you can't separate them. You can't separate them. Someone who's not living a normal life, who's forced to move from through the day, walking around, being in places that are not welcomed, begging to get stuff, not accepted in there are no public toilets they can use because they're not going to get into Starbucks to use the toilet without feeling that they're not meant to be there. The only public toilets they can use in Bristol are the bus station. So staying normal is a challenge if you haven't got somewhere to live, let alone having the ability to sort of make appointments, speak to people normally, get the kind of help that you want to stop the next problem becoming a crisis. So you need to pull people really out of that situation. And to some degree, what happened during lockdown was that people were pulled out of that situation and they were put in hotels and B&Bs and they were given support because they had to have people come in to give them what they needed. They weren't allowed out of their rooms and they got support. Now, there were other issues. There's a bit of isolation and all the rest of it, but the success rate speaks for itself. That they were given the dignity and respect of saying, yeah, you are entitled to have somewhere to live that you don't have to be out of at 6:30 in the morning and walk the streets till the next thing's open. You can stay here. You got a shower. We'll bring you food. What else do you need? Do you need some games? Do you need an iPad? Do you need a phone? What do you need? The number of people that came off drug use in that time was enormous. They were running out of the ability to give methadone scripts to people because there were so many that wanted to use that opportunity to come off hard drugs just because they've been given somewhere decent to stay. But I think what they missed in that environment was that sense of community. And I think with feeding people, there is a move towards the sort of thing that the Cook Up project was talking about. Eating isn't just a hunger issue. It's a community issue. It's a social issue. So let's have places you can come and eat with other people who are in different situations than you. People's Republic of Stoats Croft. It's not running at the moment, ran out of funding, but they had a pay what you can canteen system going, which enabled people who had no money to get it free, and people like you and me to pay for the same food that they were eating, and it all sort of cross-subsidized. But there you'd be sharing the table with ordinary people, not queuing up in all weathers to get a handout. but actually eating with other people, able to converse with them. Now, that kind of community approach is something that I would love the faith-based communities to do with. Most churches have have church halls alongside them, and you could have a altogether supper once a week. It wouldn't be that difficult to imagine doing that. And for once a week, for people to feel welcomed into a space that other people are at too, is going to be good for their well-being, which is, a world of difference from queuing at some dark door to get a sandwich.
Richard, the idea of cook-up interests me enormously, because at Central we have a large kitchen.
I know.
And space outside to grow herbs and things like that in. So I think, and I can see my other Central friends nodding, hopefully on that one, perhaps we can get together at some time very soon to discuss this.
Well, I've told you the project exists at QSA, so there's a project lead you can get in touch with, but you can also look at what's already happening in Bristol, because community kitchen still exists. Coexist Community Kitchen it's not focused on homeless people specifically, but it has the same sort of facilities. It runs courses. It's trying to help people who don't have the means to cook good food for themselves. So these projects already exist. And I think we should stop, it all individually trying to, here's a good thing, let's do that. But find out what's already happening and work with other people. Then you can do more. There are lots and lots of food programs in Bristol working at community feeding. Homelessness is only a part of that. And there's a whole food strategy. Ped Esgarian has been running workshops and getting people together to. Now, what's happened is that sadly, I think sadly, the homeless services have not connected with that very well. Caring in Bristol has, and has been very much part of helping to drive that change. But the homelessness services feel, oh no, we're a special case. These homeless people need our help. And if we could only connect those two things so that, we were talking about community services that helped all people in the community, whatever their level of need, we could do a lot better. So I really would encourage anyone, anywhere, if they feel any, don't just set it up and think it's a good idea. Find out what's already happening and work with them. You may be able to add something different. That's great, because there's going to be gaps in any service, but find out what the gap is before you try and fill it.
Yeah. Who would be the one of the interesting people to liaise with?
Ped Asghari, and if you send me an email to remind me, I will send you the links to the food strategy people.
Okay, I will do that thing. The other bit which I was interested in on that was that I was once involved with because I do a bit of work with mental health and all that type of stuff. I was once involved with a young lad who was having kind of mental health problems, and digging a bit deeper, I found out that his parents had said to him, that the best thing, you have to get onto the property ladder. You have to do that type of thing. So the young lad, amazingly enough, got a mortgage and got a little flat, a big block of flats. But unfortunately, the money he earned and the finances of the mortgage and all this lot meant he had just about enough to feed himself and pay the mortgage, and nothing else. So he was at home all the time, in his flat all the time, on his own. You know, mates would come around occasionally, but rarely. And so I suggested to him that perhaps having a flat and paying a mortgage, although well and good, he was never able to do anything socially. He was totally isolated in his flat. And so I persuaded him that, you know, to actually go and live with mates, you know, sell up and pay rent and live with a few other friends. The change was enormous. His mental health went from that to that, within the year. And so I would say owning your own place is sometimes not such a good idea.
I'm just going to put this one up again, the housing justice vision. A society where everyone has access to a home, not a house, a home that truly meets their needs, means a secure and genuinely affordable home in a neighborhood where an individual can access work and services that enable them to flourish. Now, you know, that's what we want for this chap you're talking about. But that achieving that for anyone is different for different people. You know, it's not the same solution for everyone. And what we tend to have is systems that just seem to think that people in this box need this kind of housing, and it's not very clever. But you know, there's so many faults. Yes, David.
Well, what you're saying there really resonates. And looking at that quote there, I look at that and I think, well, I want that. I want that.
Yes, of course.
I'm not saying forget about the homeless, but I'm saying, no, this is a natural aspiration. Everybody kind of wants this, and we have magically constructed a society that is very fragmented, the opposite of this, and which is all the negatives seem to be almost coming to a head at the moment. And I did, when I arrived in Bristol, it was to work, I wanted to understand social justice and social housing and social problems, and ended up working with a man who was housing the homeless. And he was describing the poverty gap that's being created by the elimination of council housing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, affordable, genuinely affordable rental housing. The rents are so much that a homeless person can't imagine how they're going to get a job that would pay them enough for them to be able to afford a commercial rent. And so I've been looking at both co-housing schemes, and one of my buddies was founding chairman of Ashley Community Housing, and their model is you take in people, refugees in this case, and you give them support and training, and you get them into the economy. But thought through some ideas on how to hack the housing system, which is we're living in a housing bubble. The cost of building a house is not related to the cost of buying or renting one anymore. They've become completely disconnected. Everybody has to buy designer jeans, as it were, rather than this, you can go to Primark or M&S and buy cheaper ones. But creating sustainable communities is, to me, the sustainable and affordable communities, not just middle-class co-housing, but the co-housing schemes that I visited, which are middle-class, as it were, co-housing schemes, are really wonderful to live in, because you've created really supportive environments. And I want that for everything. I can see it coming up in a topic in social justice, where you're really thinking about what do these people in difficulties need. But, excuse me, we're all struggling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I absolutely agree that there's no point having a vision that isn't a vision for everyone. I think it's hard to talk about social justice without getting into issues of equality and inequality and inclusion and exclusion, which you're touching on. The way I'm trying to make this as personal thing as possible rather than just a political thing. So I think sort of doing the politics on this is quite easy, you know. I mean, to me, but it doesn't work. It's that, Susan. How do you live with this lack of social justice? How do you? I can only do it by finding my level. You know, what am I prepared to give up in order not to be exploiting the system too much? And I find myself wanting, if you like, because I can see around me people who give up more than I give up, and I kind of excuse it by hanging on to this enabling to flourish bit of that vision, because I think that, well, without that, I don't know what I'd be. Yes, I could live on less, I could live in a cardboard box, but I wouldn't be flourishing. So I kind of trying to find a balance there for myself. I can't possibly make that balance for other people, but I do look around me and see what appears to be excess. You know, I do look around me, you know, amongst well-meaning people and see extravagance. And I do find it very difficult to contain my frustration with that when the people I'm looking at are Quakers. And I find it very difficult when collectively as Quakers, we live with that. So I shouldn't be saying this because I'm area meeting clerk, and I'm trying to be very, very balanced on this. But Bristol Quakers, for the number of us we are, for the number of us that go to meetings every Sunday, are enormously privileged in our wealth and resources. So when we're talking about issues of social justice, you know, we don't want to, you know, throw ourselves in the river just so we're equal with everyone else who's suffering. That's stupid. We need to stay on the bank so we can help. But are we really doing enough? Are we held back from going upstream to fish people out by the baggage that we are carrying? You know, what are we doing? Are we so that's, you know, and it's difficult because you know, we've got the right motives. We really want to do the right things, but I'm not sure that people would look at us and say, oh, I can see they're doing the right things, because look at the way they live. Look at what they've given up to achieve something worthwhile. I don't see us doing it. I don't see us leading by example. I see us resorting to, I'm going to call it comfort because other people have used the term before, it's called, but the comfort of not having to take difficult decisions. That's as much a comfort as you know, living in a nice, warm, centrally heated house. I find it, and this is very personal comment. So, but I find it very hard to live with the fact that we have paid, we have decided that we should accommodate minimum wage wardens for Central Meeting House in a flat that many people I know, and myself included, couldn't afford. So it's things like that that I think we need to constantly just, you know, I'm not saying things are wrong, it's just things I find difficult to live with. when we're talking about promoting social justice, somehow we need to be living that the best way we can. And I have difficulty sometimes with some of the decisions we collectively make, because it doesn't look as if we're taking social justice seriously in the way that we live our own lives, collectively, sometimes individually, myself included.
Oh, sorry, no, after you.
Sorry, I'll put my hand up. I have difficulty with this idea that this situation that our society is in has been, magically created. It was actively created and has been for the last more than 40 years. And I don't know that we have, it has been actively created, and it has been actively created for political reasons, in political ways. And I mean, we can tinker at the edges, we can tinker at our lives. I think there's an argument to be said for getting rid of Redland Meeting House, for instance. I think that's a white elephant that we can do without. But that's not going to change anything very much. What do we do? Sell it, and there will be a block of flats built for people who, with money. I mean, in Bedminster, we've had a massive building programme, and some of us thought, oh, this is good because this will provide housing for people. In fact, what it's doing is building expensive, mostly flats for people who have got a high income, and the majority of people who need housing in Bedminster, in South Bristol, couldn't dream of living in Bedminster. And this is a place, when I moved into it, was sort of just one up from a slum, regarded as. So my problem is, if I were to say, I don't know what I could say. I haven't got, if I could say, what could I say? I could give up my flat and become homeless.
No,
but we can all do personal things.
I think
if we've got cars, we can give up cars. If we've got something else, we can give up something.
It's
not changing society.
It's not, Susan, what we individually do. It's how we influence others.
Yes.
Now we're seeing at the moment some pretty desperate failures of leadership and integrity in leadership across the government and the police force and goodness knows where else. The argument is that they can't persuade us to do what they think is right if they don't have integrity in what they're doing. And I'm saying the same. If we want a world where everyone voted Green, for example, and everyone wanted council houses built, and that they voted for the kind of people that will make those changes happen, we have to persuade them to do that. Well, they're not going to be persuaded by us if they can't see that we're living that truth ourselves. So it's not just what we do, it's that what we do says what we believe.
That's it.
I just wanted, it's illustrative really of what you've been talking about, rather than a more intellectual point. But back in the early 80s, I was still addicted to alcohol, and I was staying in I think it was a council provided place in Waverley Road, very bleak. And I was drinking some days, not others. But life was very bleak, and as it was for many people, everyone I knew. And I heard about this wonderful place I was told about. It was just a couple of houses down on the other side of the road, and you could just go there and have a meal, and everybody was welcome. Well, my friend and I thought it was a bit of a joke. We didn't really think that sort of thing happened, but we went to see, and it was true. It was 3 people who shared the house. I suppose they might have been called hippies, although I don't know if they would have called themselves that, but they did tend to wear flowing garments. And there was always hot food on the go. And literally anyone who walked through the door was given a bowl and spoon. But that wasn't all. I mean, you could stay there for as long as you liked, 24 hours if you wanted to talk. And everyone sat around and talked. And if you were hungry, you wanted a drink, you had one. And nothing fancy. I mean, something like water or maybe instant coffee. They also had 2 or 3 rather ancient computers. That's actually where I learned to use a computer. Badly, but I did learn. I didn't stop drinking because of these people. I would like to say I did, but it was one of the really positive strands in my life that helped me to do so in 1988. And so I was still sort of friends. Well, I was friends with them for the rest of their lives. They're not any longer with us, and I can't forget the warmth and the I don't know, the naturalness, the ordinariness of what was offered. It wasn't like they were providing a paid for service. It was like you already knew these friends and they obviously welcomed you. And it reminded me of student days where we actually sat around all night talking. And also, of course, they didn't say anything whether you'd been drinking or not. They didn't seem to notice, which was brilliant. So I just these people and the way they did that, it remained like a beacon in my life. It was terribly important. It was probably the first hopeful thing that happened towards my recovery, which I'm afraid still took about another 4 years, but still. So I just like to say how important that kind of welcome and that kind of experience, and within the community, because nobody made a fuss about it. There was no name over the door. It was just a place in the community where you were welcome. And I think it could also work in somewhere like the Meeting House. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. Anyway, sorry, I'm waffling on now.
Christopher.
Yes, I'm aware that there isn't a great deal of time. A little bit of background. I used to live in East London and in fact work fairly closely with Housing Justice on a project called Spare Room for Forced Destitute Migrants. So we establish a network of people who are willing to literally share their spare room. But those people who have even less rights than the average British citizen. These are people who have fled other countries for a variety of reasons. Some recognized by the Home Office, some not. If you're fleeing environmental destruction, you can't become a refugee, recognized as a refugee, unless you get a case under the Human Rights Act, which is difficult in any way being rewritten. But that was a way of responding to acute need and was related to bringing about social justice, because, well, certainly I was already also involved in Quaker Asylum and Refugee Network, and we were working and are working to try and change the law so that people are not rendered not just destitute, but also without legal identity by the immigration system. Unfortunately, the trend, I'm fully aware because we're trying to work on it, is in the opposite direction. The Borders and Nationality Bill will actually make the fact of landing on this island without a set of papers illegal in itself. It will criminalize forced migrants just because circumstances in the country they came from made going to the British Embassy or consulate or even the Red Cross and getting recognition before you come is just not feasible. And that particularly, of course, affects the least powerful and the poorest in those communities. Yes, I think the question I would like to put to Richard, you've talked about social justice and the recognition that that's also about, in the case of housing, the availability of housing. Mm-hmm. And addressing the tension, and there is a tension in people's lives, and in fact we had a bit of it at the sustainability meeting, between those who work hard to enable people to come out of the homelessness situation, and those who are working hard politically and economically to make sure there's enough decent housing for everybody. I feel it's a both and, but do you have a comment, Richard?
Well, I do. Of course, it's both and, but I think what I've been working through here. I mean, I've been trying to share some of my personal decision making, and it's not easy. I mean, I had great difficulty leaving the Julian Trust. I put a lot of time into that, and people know me for working there. And I had to keep testing my decision not to do that, because it's worthwhile. It's a lovely sort of ideal. Who do I think I am, thinking I can do something better? And I don't know. I don't know. There's a lot of it I miss, but I just couldn't any longer live with within an organization that didn't see the need to be doing more. And I think I was getting so frustrated with that I was starting to find other problems that weren't necessarily as big as I was making out. But I did have enormous frustrations trying to persuade others that there were more things we could do. And I just realized, well, this isn't the organization to be doing it within. I have to do it within something else. So that's not directly answering your question. It's saying that I individually can't do it all. I recognize that. I'm very limited in my abilities to have any impact in this, what I've been talking about at all. But I'm trying to focus those limited abilities I have into the ones that I currently feel most comfortable with being more effective. And I personally cannot spend any of my energies in dealing with the frustration of trying to move the political world in a direction that it's not moved the right way in for the past 25 years. The only time I've ever voted for an MP who's got a seat was once when I got a Lib Dem in, who then had to resign because of rent voice scandals. So I've never ever voted for an MP that's been successful. I'll live with that. So all that stuff is out there. People like you can deal with that, but I can't. I can only do what doesn't drain me and I feel is doing something useful. And I think what I've been trying to do here is say, well, this was my decision process to say, I'm going to focus on these things and not that. And that lets me off the hook in terms of answering your big question. In my mind, anyway, it's kind of Boris Johnson non-answer. I don't know the answer to your big question. I only know the answer to my little questions. So I'm going to continue to work in my spheres of influence, which do include Quakers. I'm not accepting, the responsibility of being area meeting clerk without it having some purpose. So I I'm not trying to set an agenda, but I want the agenda to be there and to be meaningful and not just drifting along. And I hope that's, well, I kind of hope that's evident. Susan will know it is from the discussions we've had before area meetings. So trying to move things along in some way is to me the only value of being there as an area meeting clerk. The people in the meeting will make the decisions, but my responsibility is to put the agenda in front of them and to make sure it's not an agenda that ducks issues.
David.
Yeah, like Minister Fuller said, if you want to change the system, you don't like the system, set up an example of something better. Don't fight what's there. And to me, it's just very timely. The opening, my phone just flashed up and said the opening ceremony for the Chinese Winter Olympics has just started. And if you want an example of an economy that works for poor people, it's China. They set up their economy to take 1 billion people out of poverty, and they're pretty much there. They've done housing so well that they've built a few extra cities by mistake. But you can't beef at that. There's plenty of housing there, and they are doing far better on sustainability. I mean, they've got coal still, but they're the world leaders in wind and solar, electric vehicles, and actually in having a very engaged and youthful population. And I think there was a time when we were using them capitalism was using them to increase profits rather than reduce prices. And I think we now need to be looking at their example. Politically, they may not have everything that we want, but their physically managed economy, the way they deal with corruption and so on. There's lots and lots of lessons to be learned from a country that has gone from being well behind us to being the world's leading economy, almost unquestionably now, to the point where they're now lifting Africa out of poverty by building infrastructure in partnership with governments rather than exploiting a continent for raw materials and profit. So something to be learned there, I think. There's quite a good article in this month's Prospect on the Chinese leader, which is very interesting. And it's not just the system, it's the leadership of the system. And the integrity of the system. And for whatever faults you can have ideologically about what the system is that they have, the current leader has brought the integrity of the ideology back to the forefront, which has enabled him to root out the corruption that was allowed to happen in those days of massive growth. So I kind of, a simpler model to understand was Cuba, but that had its faults.
Sue.
I just wanted to say I do believe in political change, very radical, and I do believe in very radical change, and I do believe in fighting for the big things. But I just wanted to tell a brief story about that shows that I also realise the benefit of very, very, very small things that can happen. And when in 1974, I was living in a very, very, very grotty bed, me and Faith, mattresses on the floor type thing. And I got to the point where I had enough, and I just wanted to get Faith to a safe place and then dispose of myself. So I went to what I thought was a social services office to hand Faith over, and I got it wrong. I went to this place that called itself the Bristol Council for Voluntary Services or Social Services. And I walked in and I said, "Here you are, please take her." And I was taken into this room with this woman who said, "I'm going to look after Faith for a couple of hours, go off and have 2 hours to yourself for the first time in 2 years. and just walk and see the world. And which I did, and I came back, and that was the beginning of a lot of support that was offered me. But the reason I was able to accept the help was the fact that this woman had said, not you're an inadequate person and you need me to do this, but she said, you're a human being who's been looking after a 2-year-old in very, very difficult circumstances, and you need a break. So I think that we do have to approach the issues of poverty and homelessness and social justice on all levels. But the one thing that we haven't to forget is our common humanity, and that we owe each other and ourselves, although it's harder for ourselves, I think sometimes, we owe everybody respect as a human being, and no one's better than anybody else. Well, there are some people who I think are worse than others, but no one is intrinsically, and it has any more rights than anybody else. That's the important thing.
I think you've just said this. You want a world where people put people first. So yeah, I think I wouldn't disagree. Getting there is hard, and it has to be done at all levels: big political level, personal level, community, collective level. All has to be in harmony with that kind of broad aim, but it has to want the change.
Friends, I'm conscious of the time, which is now 12:15, but I would say something on the Chinese aspects, which worries me enormously, is the fate of the Uyghur people. It is okay having a very good system, but you need to take everybody along with them. And I'm afraid the fate of the Uyghurs is lamentable.
Sorry, the fate of the what?
Uyghur people.
Weaker.
Uyghur.
Oh, the Uyghur people. Yeah. Okay. But there's no society. No, I'm not going to go there. No. Not going to go there. I mean, we've got a government policy that says, but for the sake of the economy, that doesn't support marginalized people, it's okay to have still have 150 to 200 deaths a day. And they've stopped quoting the number of people that have died from COVID because it's too big to be proud of. It's massive. And so we can't point at China and say, you're letting people suffer for the sake of your economic growth, when that's exactly what we're doing in this country.
You have no argument for me that.
Anyway,
unless quite, unless anybody would like to make other comments or questions, I think this is where we must stop, friends.
Should we just mention that next week have you got the details there?
Next week we have Graham, who will be telling us of his interesting way to become, how he became a Green member.
Oh, sorry.
We look forward with interest, Graham. Thank you, friends.
Thank you, friends.
Thank you.
Bye.